Hello and welcome back. In this chapter we'll look in a bit more depth at how to build a proper form for authentication. There are two main things in this chapter. We'll see that the order of interception rules is really important, but the big job will be to build a proper login form. Most of this is routine and I'll provide a pre-written form, but there are a few little traps along the way. So we've set up a very basic security system so far. At the moment we have one URL pattern, addNewBook.do, which is only accessible to users in the role of admin. So my plan in this chapter is we're going to lock down the whole site so that only users logged in as a user will be able to access any of the links. We'll still make it that the Add New Book page can only be accessed by a system administrator. I realise that's possibly not quite realistic for a site like this. Generally, you would want anybody, whether they're logged in or not, to be able to do at least some basic browsing. But perhaps this website is for industry professionals only, and that's why we want everybody to have an account. It doesn't really matter, it's just a good working example for this practical. So we're clearly going to need to add some new intercept URLs in this list here. This is going to give me a chance to show you two concepts. The first concept is that we can apply wildcards to the pattern. So I could say, for example, that we have an intercept URL where the pattern is /**. And the ** means all URL patterns, not only at this folder level, but every folder beneath this folder as well. So really, /** means all URLs, regardless of their structure. So we could have a folder and another folder and another folder, and then some kind of URL. And this URL would be intercepted by this pattern. Alternatively, you can use a single star, but that means only intercept URL patterns at this folder level. So in this example, the pattern of page.html would be intercepted, but the pattern where the page appears to be in a folder, that would not be intercepted. So for the example that we're aiming for, I want all pages on this site to be only accessible to people who are logged in as users. So we definitely need the double asterisk pattern. And the access for this is going to be where they have the role of role_user. And the second concept, and this is a really important one, is that these intercept URLs are evaluated in order, starting at the top. So I want you to have a look at the definition that I've done here, and I want you to decide if this is a correct definition. And by the way, remember in a previous chapter, we have set up one user called RAC, which is both a user and an admin, but the user called Joe is just a regular user. So just while I've been talking, the deployment is completed. So let's see what difference that has made. Well, if I visit all books now, then fantastic, we are being challenged to log in. And I'm going to log in as our regular plain user Joe. Their password is password. So that's good. I'm now in. I think I'll save that password for future use. And I can now go to the shopping cart and find by author without penalty. But have you spotted the problem here with the configuration that I just made? Well, if I go to the Add New Book link, our regular plain user Joe has been able to visit this page. And that's because I've made a mistake in my ordering of the URL patterns. The problem is that we have a user in the role of role user, and Spring Security is going to run down this list of patterns, starting with this one here on line 16. And this is saying that all pages, regardless of where they live in the hierarchy, is going to be accessible to the role of users. So Spring has applied that logic to the add new book pattern and has therefore decided that Joe is eligible. And it will go no further. It doesn't have to go any further down the list. And this pattern, which is really a catch-all pattern, absolutely needs to go at the bottom of the list to make sure that our effectively specific rules for add new book is evaluated first. So I'll get that deployed, and that should now work. So I'll run this test again, and by the way, because we are now using form-based authentication and not basic authentication, the user will automatically be logged out as soon as we do a redeploy. And that's because the sessions are being invalidated. So to prove that, as soon as I go to all books, I'm being challenged. And now Joe logs in. That's good. That's good. That's good. But if they try to add a new book, now correctly, we're getting an access denied. So that's great. If I visit the logout link, then I am being logged out and I'm immediately being challenged for a new username and password because, of course, all of the pages in this application are protected and I can go no further without successfully logging in as somebody. So that's good. Now, the main objective of this chapter is that we really need, if I click the logout link, it would be really good if we could upgrade this very basic form that comes pre-supplied with Spring Security and replace it with our own form. This isn't particularly difficult to do, but there are a few little traps along the way. And I think we'll start by examining this form that has been predefined by Spring Security. Of course, we can do that in any browser by using the view page source function. There isn't really anything clever in here. Let's step through the main features. I think the first thing to point out is there is a small block of JavaScript here, which automatically puts the focus on the username field. That's just for usability. It means that the username will always start with the focus. The really important element here is where the form has been defined. It's just a regular HTML form. The method is going to be a post, which I think we should expect. The really important bit here is the action. So this URL must be connecting to some kind of logic on the server that's producing the login function. Now, we've never seen that functionality. It's going to be some kind of a controller, but the point is that it has a predefined URL name of login. Of course, we never wrote that function. We never defined that URL. This functionality is going to take two parameters, which is naturally the username and password. But I'd like to highlight here that the name of the username field is just username, and the name of the password field is password. Now, if you're familiar with standard Java web security, and if not, there is a bonus chapter in this course that covers that, the Java Servlet API defines that the name of the username field should be J_username, password is J_password, and the name of the action here is J_security check. Now, a little bit of history. I can tell you that previous versions of Spring Security did indeed use J_username, J_password, and the slightly different action of J_spring_security check. But in more recent versions, they've changed the defaults. And the reason for this is it's probably a minor thing, but by using these more obscure names, it's not going to be possible for a user who looks at this form to work out what security mechanism we have running in the background. If they saw J_spring_security check there, then they would know we're using Spring Security, which I don't think is a disaster by any means, but it's a principle of security that you should really keep as much secret as possible. But anyway, these are just the default values, and it turns out that we can change the defaults if we wish. And we don't have to do that by any means, but I'm going to do it anyway, just so that we get a better understanding for how all of this is working. The way we do that is in the form login tag here. Now, previously, we just used form login, and that meant that we got all of the defaults. Well, if I use the IntelliSense here, that's Control or Command Space. Over the course, we're going to be looking at most of these attributes, but I'll just look at the main ones in this chapter. I'll start with the login processing URL. This is going to be the URL that the login form is posted to. If unspecified, as it is at the moment, it defaults to /login. And that's where, going back to the web page, this action has come from here. Now we can experiment with this. We can try changing it. So this is the login processing URL. Be careful there. There are some very similar sounding attributes. And we could make sure there's a /, but we can put any string that we like in here. So this could be perform login, for example. Really doesn't matter what that is. I'll redeploy this because we haven't so far referred to that property anywhere. So the redeployment's just happened, and I'll test this by going to viewallbooks.do, which immediately takes me to the login form. And if I do a view page source, can you see now that the action has become /perform login? There's probably no great purpose for changing that action, but I wanted to show you that it's possible. And exactly the same thing for this username and password field. We can change that by using the password parameter attribute. So this could be, well, anything. I'm going to go for VPP password with a capital P. I'm going to do the username parameter as well, and that's going to be VPP username. And we can test that with a redeploy. And we'll go again to viewallbooks.do and check the contents of that form. And now we have VPP password as the name of the password field and VPP username for the username. Now, really, if you're building a new application, there's no need to do that. The defaults are perfectly suitable. But perhaps you're working with a legacy application where you already have a login form built, and those fields are called J_username or whatever. So you could override the defaults. I'm going to leave these overridden values in place just so that we remember that these field names and the login URL is under our control. Clearly what we need to do here is build a better login form than the one you can see here. But I just want you to bear in mind that checking the source of that generated one, there's nothing clever in there apart from a regular form with a specific action. So if you want to provide your own login page, and I guess you almost certainly do, then it's just a case of writing your own page with at least this form. And of course, you can put all of your other stuff in there as well. So how do we provide our own custom login page? I've already provided you a file in your starting project. It's in the web folder and it's called login.jsp. I'd like you to review that, but there's not too much that's very interesting in here. It's a regular HTML page. It's going to match the same look and feel as the rest of the site. So I have a link here to the style sheet, the CSS style sheet, and it's going to have the same header and footer that all of the other pages do. But here's the important bit. Here's the definition of the login form. Exactly as the predefined generated one that we saw, we need to make this a method post. And most importantly of all, we need to point it at our login URL. Well, I've decided to use for that the C:URL tag. Again, that's just from standard JSTL. And that's going to make sure that the URL is generated with the context root in place. So I don't need to worry about putting the /my web app in there. But we are going to have to change this. Currently, this is set to /login, Now that needs to match whatever you've got in your security configs login processing URL. And I changed that a few moments ago to /perform login. So we need to reflect that here in the value for the C:URL. Be careful that you change the value and not the var. I don't know how familiar you are with this C:URL. The idea is that the generated URL that comes out of here is placed in this variable, and that will get pasted into this action. And then we have the username and password fields, and it's a simple job of making sure that the names that you have here and here are matching the ones that we have in the form login configuration, unless of course you're using the defaults, in which case username and password will be fine. But for me it will be VPP username and VPP password. There's then just a regular submit button. So I think the thing to take away from this is that the login form is nothing more complicated than a regular form. But we're going to have to do a few things to make this work properly. And the first obvious thing is, back to security config, we've got to tell Spring Security that we want it to use our form instead of its very basic predefined one. We'll do that, of course, by providing a parameter here into the form login, and it's called the login page. Let's just review the Java docs here. If no login is specified, then it will automatically create one at /login. So we've seen that already. But now our login page is going to be, we'll need a / here, and it's going to be login.jsp. So that's the first required step. There are going to be some problems here when we deploy it, but why don't we give it a try and see what happens? And we'll try to visit the viewallbooks.do page. So problem number one is that we immediately have an error. It appears to be an error rendered by the browser, and it's saying that this web page has a redirect loop. Error, too many redirects. I wonder if you can spot the problem here. The problem is that we have secured our entire site. Every single page in this application is going to require a login box. So I guess you can see where the infinite loops coming in here. Spring Security is trying to render the login.jsp page, but we have to be logged in to access that page. So Spring Security tries to render the login page, which we have to be logged in for, and so on and so on. So what we're going to always have to do if we're supplying site-wide patterns like this one is we're going to have to at least open up the security on the login page. So the way we do that will be with another intercept URL. The pattern's easy, login.jsp. And the access rule this time is a special access rule, which is just the stop string of permit all. And that will let everybody enter that page, regardless of whether they're logged in or not. We'll have to add a few more of these over time, but I hope that at least has got rid of the redirect loop. So let's see if that's changed things for the better. If I go back to viewallbooks.do, well, this is an improvement. We've got rid of the redirect loop. Clearly the styling isn't right here. You might be able to guess why the styling's not right, but I appear to have the form correctly presented. Before we try to log in, it's worth inspecting the page source here to check that the form is rendering correctly. The important line is the line here, where the form action definitely looks correct. We've got the context root and our custom login URL. And the username and password fields both have the correct names. So that's looking good, but let's see what happens if we use a non-existent username and a non-existent password. Okay, well, it's not letting us log in, and it's taking us back to the login page, which looks good, but we have no obvious way of knowing that that was an error. So that would certainly be worth improving. If we try our old friend Joe with the password, then now this is really weird. I'm not getting the viewallbooks.do page, which is what we expected. We're getting the styles.css page output. But what we're really seeing here is really the same problem that's causing the login page not to have any styling. And the problem is because the entire site is protected. The styles.css page is protected and it's viewable to logged in users only. So when we're on this page, the CSS page is simply inaccessible. And it's kind of confusing the browser because really we think we're seeing a login page to access the site itself. But really the browser's presented this page in order to allow us to access the style sheet, which of course is an internal thing, but the browser doesn't really know that. I'll just do this again to demonstrate. So when we click login, the browser's dutifully presenting us the styles.css page. It's a bit of a bug, really, I guess, in the browser, and your browser might behave differently, I don't know. But the point is, clearly we need to make sure that the styles.css page is not protected so that this nonsense doesn't happen, most importantly, so that we get proper styling on this page. There's two ways that we can do this. The first one's fairly obvious, and we've pretty much covered this already. We could use the permit all tag to permit everybody to visit the CSS page. But there is another way. It's subtly different, and it's not really until we go deeper with Spring Security that we can really get a full grasp of the difference here. But it is the approach that I prefer, so I'm going to go for this with a sort of very high level description of what I'm doing. We are allowed to specify a separate HTTP block. So if you like, this is one set of security configurations. This is a second set of security configurations. And for this configuration, we're only going to match where the pattern is equal to, and our style file, by the way, is called styles.css. And by supplying the parameter of security equals none, this is telling Spring Security that there will be no security whatsoever applied to styles.css. It is a subtle difference. When we use this permit all in this block, then Spring Security is applied to that URL pattern, but Spring Security is going to decide, yes, it's fine to access this URL. Whereas with this version, we're simply not doing any security at all. Now, really, you could do it either way, but I just wanted to take the opportunity to show you why you can have multiple HTTP blocks. I have an error in my XML because I have a closing tag there when I didn't need one. Now, I would say in real life, probably you would want all of your CSS files, possibly all of your public resources, to be in a single subfolder, like something like CSS, and then you would apply the security to that folder and all subfolders. Then you would create a folder here called CSS and put all of your public items in there. The only reason I'm not doing that on this course is that because of the way we've set this up, you're going to have to go through all of the JSP pages and find all references to styles.css, which is going to be tedious here. I want to crack on with the important thing, which is the security. So let's give that a redeploy and see if that's made any difference. Okay, so we'll go back to viewallbooks.do, and okay, well, it's not the nicest looking page, but that's about as good as my CSS design goes. We are clearly getting the correct page. So we'll do the usual test, a nonsense username and password, and we are at least getting the login page back. We need to think about how we might be able to supply some kind of an error there. But if I go for Joe and our good password, then we are able to log in. So a much better looking form. And if we click the logout link, then we're getting the login page back. I would like now to address the problem of failed logins. We're just getting back really nothing. That's not very helpful. By the way, the reason that we're seeing Joe appearing back here again when I fail to log in is simply Chrome trying to help by restoring the remembered username and password. I'll be coming back to address that shortly, but that's got nothing to do with Spring Security or the code that we've written. But it's clearly not very nice that when we put nonsense in, we just get really no feedback whatsoever. You might remember that the generated version did at least give us some kind of an error message. The simplest way of doing this, if we go back into the security config, is one more of the properties in the form login is there is a authentication failure URL. And I've just moved the camera a little bit there so you can see the comments here. This is the URL where we're going to go if there's a login failure. Now, if there isn't one supplied, then Spring is automatically creating a failure login URL at, and now this is interesting, at /login (error). That's what it was doing by default. The idea of that is this (error) becomes a request parameter. And that means if we set this failure login to be the same page as the login page itself, then we can query the value of this parameter to see if we have been redirected back to the page. Well, I don't know if that made any sense, but I can demonstrate it by simply coding this up. We can make the authentication failure URL be equal to exactly the same as our login page, login.jsp. That will take us back to where we were. And we'll add in a (error). And then what we can do in the login.jsp page is we can test for that parameter. Now, it doesn't really matter where we do this, and to style this up and to make it look good is beyond the scope of this course. I think I'm just going to drop in here inside the form a test. I can do a test using simple JSTL, and the test is going to be if the param, and I don't know how familiar you are with JSTL, but in JSTL and in JSP, we can test the value of the request parameters with the param dot. And by saying if param.error is not equal to null, we're just saying if the URL contained an error element. If that's the case, then we know we've been redirected back to here. Then we can add some kind of a message. So I'm just going to go for invalid username and or password. Of course, we could style this up or make it fade in or do anything you like. But the key thing is it's very easy to find out that it was a failed login. So let's try that. Back to viewallbooks.do, and we will do a bad login. And that's good. Nothing clever going on here. You can see there that the URL just happens to have (error) at the top, so we can render that error. And we could keep going round and round until we finally get the correct one. So a decent looking form and pretty functional. There is one missing feature. If our login were to fail, then the username is not being remembered. So on a login failure, our user has to type their username again. That could be very annoying, especially if the usernames are email addresses. Surprisingly, out of the box, this isn't easy to achieve in Spring Security. So we're going to have to spend the whole of the next chapter implementing a remember username function. It's quite hard work, that one, so have a good break first.